We are opening up
Mr.
for-
Mayor, can you
Yes.
hear me? Scott Mitnick here.
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're opening up for a regularly scheduled council meeting. As a reminder, we will be conducting this evening's meeting in a virtual setting. Council members and staff are participating from remote locations, and Deputy City Clerk Mona Schilling is in chamber to accommodate public communication. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting live this evening on Spectrum Channel 3 and 22, AT&T Uverse Channel 99, and or El Segundo TV at youtube.com. Please remember to mute your mics when not speaking, and council members, if making a motion or seconding a motion, please do so using your last name in order for the clerk to hear and report correctly. All right, and we're going to start by having the invocation tonight provided by Madam Clerk, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Council Member Nickel.
All right, here we go. We gather to make decisions for our community. May we use only our best skills and judgment, keeping ourselves impartial and neutral as we consider the merits and pitfalls of each matter that is placed before us, and always act in accordance with what is best for our community and our fellow citizens.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councilman Nickel.
If you cannot see a flag, just face City Hall and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nickel. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Sure. Council Member Giroux?
Here.
Council Member Nickel?
Here.
Council Member Perstuck?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel?
Here.
And Mayor Boyles.
Here, thank you. All right, first up, we're going to have Chief Donovan of our fire department and Dr. Mark Cohen together. They're going to be giving us an update on the COVID-19 situation, and Dr. Mark Cohen is a doctor that supports us on the regional level. So Chief Donovan, take it away, please.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Mark Cohen. He's a practicing emergency room physician, and he's also the medical director for the El Segundo Fire Department. He also serves in that same capacity for the Torrance Fire Department and Manhattan Beach Fire Department. And I've used this analogy at the federal level. CDC has been guiding the response to the COVID. At the state level, it's the Department of Public Health. At the county level, we have the LA County Public Health and the Health Officer. And locally, we've had Dr. Cohen that's helped us tremendously, helping us in our response, preparing our paramedics in terms of making sure they have the appropriate personal protective equipment and that we have the right guidance in place following a potential exposure. So he's been a tremendous asset. I wanted to give the community just a quick update in terms of our current status as it relates to our COVID-19 response, some statistical data that will be provided by Dr. Cohen and some clinical experience, and then if the council has any questions. First and foremost, as I've mentioned before, we continue to be fully staffed, equipped, and ready to respond to any emergency, including patients that are feeling ill, and we encourage our community that if needed to access 911, dial 911, and we will provide timely a response and exceptional patient care to whatever the needs are. So what we're seeing is in the community here, and in fact in throughout California, it's this transition from from response to the recovery efforts, and we're doing the same. We're following the governor's most recent announcement in a news release that this Friday he will be loosening some of the safe at home order that was presented. The reason he's doing this is he's been following, and he put out a blueprint in terms of data and analytics to follow to make sure that we are responding appropriately to flatten the curve for the COVID-19. And according to the governor's data that was released yesterday, we currently have enough supply of personal protective equipment throughout the state. Our hospitals have enough bed surge capacity for patients that are sick and need hospitalization. There's enough ventilators for patients that are critically ill and need to have advanced life support care. And there's testing capabilities and expanded contact tracing is on target. And so what that means is we're going into a phase 2 of a reopening. And as I've mentioned, this is not going to be a light switch turning back on. It will be a dimmer switch that will continually grow in intensity in terms of the things that we'll be able to do in our coming back to normal. That said, we do feel that we've been here locally in El Segundo paying close attention and following the orders of the governor, and most importantly, the LA County Public Health Officer. That's the individual that has immense power and influence, and those orders that will be followed locally are important to us. And we will be working with LA County Public Health to get more details in terms of how they will be looking to implement the governor's loosening of the order. As it relates to some of the cases here, we have some data, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Cohen, who will continue. But in El Segundo, we now have 29 confirmed cases as of this afternoon. And in the South Bay, there are 1,527 confirmed cases. As I mentioned before, the number of cases will most likely continue to increase. We're in par with our neighboring jurisdictions in terms of the cases per 10,000 population. I'd now like to turn it over to Dr. Cohen, who can provide a little bit more detail in terms of the county numbers and some of his clinical experience. And then certainly if the council has any questions for us, we'll be available. Dr. Cohen.
Thank you, Chief. Just to piggyback off of what you were saying in terms of the current numbers, as of public health data available today, there have now been 27,815 confirmed cases in the county, including 5,000 of which required hospitalization. There have been 1,313 deaths attributed to COVID so far, including 58, unfortunately, since yesterday. That accounts for nearly half of in terms of the overall death rate here in this county, we account for about half of the California deaths. There have been 2,400 statewide so far. Currently there's an estimated about 1,800 to 2,000 active cases in terms of patients who are being followed or investigated for COVID. So about 1/10 of the total cases that have been tested and identified are still considered to be active at this time.
There you go.
In terms of testing, so far, again, if there's been 27,000 cases that have been confirmed, there's obviously a lot more that have been tested. The data from laboratory testing so far in the county, approximately 170,000 lab tests have been performed, including about 14% of which were positive. So that's essentially the PCR test looking for active infection in terms of patients who are actively carrying the infection and are sick at that time. There are active testing sites throughout the county available through the lacounty.gov website. If you go to the covid19.lacounty.gov, you'll be able to find a local testing site, and through a screening process there is testing available to the public right now.
So we're transitioning to the recovery phase. We're looking at following the LA County Public Health Order. We're paying close attention to our ability to reopen our city facilities, the library, the parks, playgrounds, and the beaches. And we're looking forward. We do have draft plans in place in order to properly respond. And quite frankly, we're waiting for the LA County Public Health Officer to provide some guidance, and we'll be ready to respond accordingly to that. So in all, we continue to stand ready. As I've mentioned many times before, I appreciate the support from everyone here locally in El Segundo. Anecdotally, I look out the office windows here on Main Street and I see people wearing their face covering when they're out doing their essential business. And everything that we do here does make a difference. So I appreciate the support of our community. And Dr. Cohen and I are available for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Councilman Member Drew.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cohen. Quick question for you is why do we see the CDC numbers vary so differently from what we get from LA County and what we see in the media and what we see in actually the daily reports that we get?
The numbers vary for several reasons. A lot of the early numbers were based on projections, based on the expectation of business as usual. So the early projections in terms of hundreds of thousands of cases in California, tens of thousands of deaths, that was based on previous models looking at infectious disease, the usual spread, and the usual morbidity and mortality. What we found as this particular disease has been so aggressive and been so intense is that we've taken a very different approach. So the approach was not to try to deal with this in a regular fashion, but it was a try to deal with the spread and deal with the potential for rather amazing numbers in terms of the people actually sick at any given time. The concept of flattening the curve came from the need for treating a population exposed to a pandemic situation. So the thought being that if we only had a finite number of hospital beds, a finite number of ICU beds, and a finite number of interventions such as ventilators to preserve life, that if we could prevent everybody from getting sick at that same time and essentially flatten the curve by spreading out the disease so that we did not have major numbers at any given time, that people who could survive this with medical intervention, such as hospitalization and ventilatory support, would survive. So as we started to do social isolation, as we slowed down the actual spread of this virus, the models changed, and they continue to change on a daily basis. So the social distancing and the isolation has done a tremendous job in terms of limiting the spread so far. And that's why we've seen not tens of thousands of deaths, but significantly less. And this is nationwide as well. So it has definitely improved the response initially.
I'm actually not talking about the models themselves. I'm talking about the actual, like if you go to the CDC website right now and you look at the death rates and the death numbers, it is starkly different than what we're seeing on the reports and on the TV and all that. I guess that's maybe the disconnect I'm having with it. And I'm not trying to minimize everything. It's just, as we start talking through these things and people in the community start doing these things, and anybody who's seen our local Facebook sites will tell you these numbers get tossed around as freely and as you can imagine. And there just seems to be such conflicting data on so trying to figure out what is real and what is being hyped is very difficult to do. And I was hoping you could maybe shed some light on the fact that, for example, COVID-related deaths on the CDC site for the week of 4/25 say 4,521 nationally. So why would that say that, yet we're seeing it differently? Is it a reporting thing? In your opinion, what is it?
It's difficult without knowing the specific data that you're referring to, but some of the data, again, because it's culled from different public health services, from various county and state public health services, those numbers are going to change as they get reported, whether it's being reported in real time at the end of each day or if it's being essentially collated at the end of each week. I'm not exactly sure how the data is being collected necessarily. The other thing is trying to classify as to what specifically counts as a COVID-related death. Because if somebody who is otherwise healthy comes in respiratory distress and is positive for COVID and ultimately expires, that's a fairly clear-cut case for the medical examiner to attribute to COVID. But if they happen to have a mild case and that pushed them with multiple comorbidities into a horrible state, could that be attributed to COVID? Could that be attributed to their underlying disease? Also hard to say. And the other question is, in retrospect, as we realize that there have been quite a few asymptomatic cases, we've gone back and we thought the first COVID deaths in this state were in March, but they've gone back and actually done some additional serologic testing and have found that there have been cases going back to February. So as the recognition that this disease is very atypical and it presents very differently for patient to patient, I think the information as to what constitutes a COVID-related death will change as well.
Gotcha. I just have one other thing. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. What is in your opinion, the potential mental health toll that this type of thing would take on people due to what's happened, whether it be economically, socially, what have you, over the past month and a half?
Difficult to calculate, but I would say it's going to be incalculable. Obviously, everybody who's been socially isolating or isolated has had an issue. Those of us who are working the quote-unquote front lines in the emergency room and are putting on PPE and armor every single shift, We've got our own issues that we're dealing with. This is certainly going to change the fabric of society. So the question as to whether the risk in terms of the mental health versus the physical health, trying to find the balance between the two, is not a question I'm equipped to answer.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lance. Councilmember Perstock.
Yes. So, one of Dr. Cohen, one of the things we talked about in closed session is the number of active cases, the current active cases in our county. And you mentioned that it was about 2,000 active cases with potentially about 4,000 asymptomatic cases. So, as you know, those numbers are a lot smaller, because I think one of the things that people need to understand is we did have a lot of cases, but there's not a lot of those people are not they can't transmit the disease going like they're now free of the COVID-19. So I just wanted to, is there any way that the county, as they continue to publish these numbers, actually publish the active cases so there's a clear understanding of how many people are actually currently have the virus when they look at the numbers, rather than just looking at a history of numbers?
So in terms of the total number of cases, as far as the positive cases being 27,000, that comes directly from the County Public Health Service. The estimated number of active cases actually comes from a secondary data collection aggregator. So I'm not certain that that's the true number, or if that's just an estimate. And then their estimate, their assumption that there's going to be another 4,000 asymptomatic cases, I don't know the methodology necessarily. So some of this may be coming from the CDBH that's essentially just not immediately present on their website, but it may be data that's being aggregated from other hospitals or other sources. So I'm presuming that it's fairly accurate data in the sense that it does correlate to the sort of that slow burn, the continuous patient population that we're seeing. So with the assumption that there still are several thousand cases, again, those are just the presumption that that's about 2,000 active cases that have been tested. So people who've been tested within the last week or two who continue to be symptomatic, sick, or shedding virus. But there's also going to be that 4,000 presumably who are asymptomatic or have simply just not been tested, who are also potentially walking around or just shedding virus, continuing to be potentially infectious as well. The other issues that we don't know necessarily, that the people who have been quote unquote cured, the ones who have cleared the virus, who are now asymptomatic and feeling better, even after they've finished having symptoms, even after they've spent a few weeks and are feeling perfectly normal, surveillance studies have shown that some of those people will continue to actually test positive for up to a month or even longer. So the clinical implication of that isn't so clear, but the fact that they can still detect virus in those patients would suggest that even asymptomatic patients who have been a month out after their symptoms resolve could theoretically be infectious still.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cohen. Mayor Pro Tem.
Dr. Cohen, in closed session, we talked about we would be in the early part of a window for new diagnoses from people who conceivably had been out at some of the open facilities in neighboring counties over the last 2 weeks. And I know that there's not data available to that yet, but I was wondering if you would mind repeating some of your anecdotal observations from the emergency rooms over the weekend. I think there's merit to it, not to be an alarmist, but I think just for the population around here, we're so concerned about our ability to get out there, that some of the anecdotal observations of the healthy tension there.
So obviously now the county borders are wide open. People can come and go as they please. And what's done within El Segundo isn't the same thing as being done in neighboring cities, and the same that goes for LA County and Orange County. My clinical practice is in an emergency room in Orange County. And I was actually working on the weekend that they sort of unofficially opened the beaches in Huntington and Newport again. We saw an immediate uptick in terms of patients having more sports-related injuries, beach-related injuries, as people were going out and having physical activities and getting into accents and things like that, which clearly showed that they were interacting again and essentially in a tight social situation without appropriate distancing. So whereas we saw in the immediate phase that there was going to be a few more the sort of traditional broken bone type situations, for the next 3 or 4 shifts I had after that, we still had a very low census in terms of patients that we were suspecting were COVID cases, because we had sort of hit a little bit of an ebb there. But now all of a sudden, we are about a week out, and for the last several shifts, we've had another influx of COVID type cases. So just from an anecdotal perspective, once they started having a little bit of a relaxation of the social distancing, because of the limited amount of places that were open and the crush of people that ended up at those particular locations, I've clearly seen an increase in the number of potential COVID cases that have come across, and several of which have tested positive. So from an anecdotal perspective, I have definitely seen the uptick that was to be expected with opening.
Okay, any further questions for Dr. Cohen or Chief Donovan? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to public communication. Madam Deputy City Clerk Schilling, is there anyone in chamber wishing to speak?
There is no members from the public for public communications here in the council chamber.
Thank you, Ms. Schilling. All right, Madam Clerk, have you received any written public comments?
Yes, I have. I will read them to you. Dear Mayor Boyles and council members in session, El Segundo's largest employee organization, the ESCEA, opposes exempting ESCEA represented employees from the FFCRA. There is no current emergency requiring that this action be taken prior to meeting and conferring with the city's employee organizations, particularly when it appears that the intent is to compel any employee forced to take time off due to COVID-19 to use their own leave balances rather than take advantage of the 80 additional hours provided by Congress. If this action goes forward, we will file the appropriate unfair practice charges with the Public Employment Relations Board, PERB, and seek to have the measure invalidated. We have directed inquiries to HR, but have yet to receive an acknowledgement, much less a response to our questions. Please make our organization's opposition part of the official record of this evening's council meeting. Regards, Wendell Phillips, ESCEA General Counsel. Item number 2. ESMOA wishes everyone well, and we encourage residents to visit our free online program offerings at ESMOA at Home that includes free resources for all ages. Please visit us online at www.esmoa.org. All the best, your ESMOA team. And I have a third one that I just received. In reviewing the agenda for tonight's council meeting, we noticed that management is proposing to exempt employee classifications in our unit, as well as other units, from coverage under the FFCRA. We have questions regarding the criteria that management has used to determine the exemption for each clarification in our unit. Accordingly, we want to meet and confer on this issue as soon as possible. Please send us dates and times that you're available to meet. We look forward to discussing the matter with you. Paul Samaras, ESSPEA. And I'm sorry, but that was a direct to David, the HR director. And that's what I have for you this evening.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Mitnick, any comments?
No. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, members of council, we'll follow up accordingly with the two individuals that submitted opinions about agenda item number 4. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, item A, procedural motions. Consideration of a motion to read all ordinances and resolutions on the agenda by title only. Stating your last name, do I have a motion to read all ordinances and resolutions by title only?
Nickel, so moved.
Thank you, sir. Do I have a second?
First, second.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Clerk, please take a voice vote.
Yes. Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nickel.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Here. Or aye.
Excuse me, Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel
Aye.
and Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
Okay, you passed 5-0.
Thank you. All right, moving on to consent calendar. Item B on the agenda, items 1 through 4. And let's see, does anyone want to pull any item from consent? Councilman Nichol.
I would like to pull item 3, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Do I have a motion to approve items 1, 2, and 4?
Perstuck so moved.
Okay,
Giroux, second.
thank you. A voice vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Giroux,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel,
Aye.
and Mayor Boyles.
Yes,
Okay, those were approved.
5-0. Okay, great. Item 3, Councilman Nichol.
Oh. Sorry.
Washington Park.
So I pulled item 3 because it's the completion of the new park structure at Washington Park. And I thought that it would be a nice moment to acknowledge the completion of the upgraded portion of that park, but then also to allow the community to understand that as much as we're accepting this project as complete, the park is still closed at this time and will not be reopened until a county order does so.
Great. Thank you, Councilman Nichol. Did you need staff comments or anything, or would you like to move approval?
I would like to move to approve.
Okay, I'll second that. Voice vote, please.
Councilmember Giroux,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel,
Yes.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
Passed 5-0.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Under D, item 5, receive and file fiscal year 2019-2020 general fund mid-year budget update and recommended adjustments. Mr. Mitnick will report on this item.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, the way the technology is set up here. All right, so this item number 5, it is on pages 27 through 49 of the agenda packet. This is the mid-year budget report, and we do this when we're halfway through the fiscal year, and we are at the halfway point. I'm going to have the finance director, Joe Lilio, he will walk you through. Also, the PowerPoint that we're going to show council, you do have a separate copy of it if you have any difficulty following along online. I do want to stress for the council, for city employees and members of the public, a great deal of effort, time, and energy has been put into this mid-year update. This is not your normal or standard update. We will walk you through primarily the general fund, but also the other funds, the other business units. COVID-19, the coronavirus, has had a significant, if not profound, impact on our revenues. And our finance director will walk you through those impacts and the different scenarios that we contemplated, and we're going with scenario number 1, and he will explain that. So I would ask that you allow him to go through his presentation. Feel free to ask questions along the way. And our interim public works director, Mark Watkins, he will provide a summary of the capital projects and where those are. And then we will talk at the end, and I'll probably come on at that point, and we'll talk about how we're going to get through the rest of this fiscal year and the budget balancing tools that we'll use for next year's budget as we're working on preparing for that. So if okay with the mayor and members of the council, I'll turn it over to Finance Director Joe Lilio. Thank you.
Please.
Joe, you're muted.
I think we're having technical difficulties, so just bear with us. Thank you.
Joe, you want to go over here?
Go to the other side, Joe. I need all my stuff though.
Okay, Joe, I unmuted you. You should be okay now.
Speak. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I apologize about that. So, Mr. Mitnick, thank you very much for the introduction. Good evening, Mayor Boyle, city council members. So the item before you tonight is the mid-year budget presentation. To start off, the total adopted budget for the current fiscal year was $137.7 million. This is for all funds. So all operating funds and capital funds. Includes the enterprise funds as well. Of that 137.7, $80.8 million is for the general fund. The general fund pays for the majority of the city's basic operations, services, and general capital improvement projects. So as Mr. Mitnick introduced, that staff did spend a lot of time and effort analyzing the financial impact that COVID-19 is having on city revenues. Staff did come up with 3 scenarios. The first scenario that we'll go over, the virus, which is scenario 1, the virus peaks in May of 2020. The recovery slowly starts in July of 2020. And when we say slowly, it's very slow. We do a very slow ramp up of the economy coming back online, nowhere near normal activity. And with scenario 1, the general fund is projected to lose approximately $9.6 million or 12% in revenue loss. That's very significant. In scenario 2, the virus peaks in August of 2020 and economic recovery slowly begins in October of 2020. The general fund is projected to experience a $15.2 million loss or 20% for fiscal year 1920 revenues. So this is an additional $5.6 million over scenario 1. And again, this assumes that the virus peaks in August 2020. Restrictions are maintained by the state and the county. The current restrictions are maintained by the state and the county through August, so they don't start easing up the restrictions until August. In scenario 3, virus peaks in December of 2020, and economic recovery slowly begins in January of 2021. So the fiscal impact for our current fiscal year would be $16.1 million or 21% of the general fund adopted revenues. So with each scenario, the level of necessary offsetting budget reductions, position reductions, and service impacts becomes more pronounced. So this slide reflects that. So we do, again, have the summary here of the different scenarios. So based on the current status of the existing emergency declarations, proclamations, and orders, combined with staff's financial analysis to date, staff is basing the fiscal year 1920 general fund mid-year budget review and recommended actions on scenario 1. And again, just to recap that's the virus slowly starts improving in May, and economic recovery slowly starts coming back online in July. And so to offset the $9.6 million in revenue loss, we came up with, in scenario 1, offsetting appropriation reductions of $6.2 million. And then the prior fiscal year, which the audit just completed in March, so fiscal year 18-19, which ended September 30th of 2019. We ended with a carryover balance to the positive of $3.4 million. So that will be used along with the appropriation reduction of $6.2 million to offset the revenue loss of $9.6 million. So looking at this slide, it's slide 6, we adopted the budget in late September of 19 with total reserves ending, and this includes the economic uncertainty reserve of $2.0 million. So total reserves of $15.1 million, and under scenario 1, with the corrections that we're making, we'll be able to maintain that reserve balance, general fund reserve balance, including economic uncertainty reserve of $15.1 million. So this table represents the total general fund revenues collected through the first 6 months of the current fiscal year, as well comparing as well the first 6 months of the prior fiscal year. So the revenues are trending very similar. So if we take a look, the middle column there is fiscal year 1920 actual through March 31st, 2020. The city have collected $40.7 million in general fund revenues, compared to the prior year of $40.9 million. And in the prior year, we ended total revenues just above $80 million. So again, we're tracking in line with last year's revenues and some of the particular revenue line items. So if we look at number 1 here on the chart, transit occupancy tax, total collected through the current year is slightly higher than the prior year. So some of our pre-COVID-19 revenues were tracking higher than what we anticipated in the budget and higher than last year's revenues. And again, to reiterate, we're projecting $9.6 million in lost revenue. That's compared to the budget. Pre-COVID-19, the current revenues were online tracking $81 million. So that's a $14 million loss compared to where the current year revenues were actually trending, or a 17% decline. So that's very significant. So I do want to highlight some of the most significant revenue numbers that are declining. To begin with is transit occupancy tax. So that's down about 40% compared to budget, or $6.1 million. And to put things in perspective, the month of March saw a citywide hotel occupancy rate of only 44%. And this is normally, our occupancy rate is normally 90%. And then for the projection of scenario 1, the months of April, May, and June, I'm only utilizing a 5% vacancy rate. July, 10%, and slowly ramping up thereafter. And as the stay-at-home orders are gradually lifted and the local economy will begin to recover, the TOT will slowly begin to come back online as well. But the numbers, even through the next fiscal year, which when we get to strategic planning for 2021, we'll see that those numbers are not going to be in line with where they were in the past. Charges for service is the next line item, down $1.5 million, or 28%. This is primarily due to the recreation and park programming and library programming being closed through the end of May, as well as a slowdown in planning and building safety permitting activity. Sales tax is the next line item that had a significant drop, $824,000. Again, this is compared to budget, or a 7% drop. However, pre-COVID-19, we were trending to come in line about $13 million per year in sales tax. So that actually represents slightly over a $2 million drop where we were trending for the sales tax line item. So this amount also includes the governor's executive orders. So he had 2 executive orders. The first executive order was for businesses that have returns of under $1 million will receive an extra 3 months to file through July 31st, 2020. Since these revenues will be received in July or August, The executive order will not impact the city's sales tax revenue for 2019-20. They'll still be received this current year. So it just represents a 3-month deferral in cash flow. The revenues will still come in this year. For the second program is for small businesses that have annual gross revenues of $5 million or less. These businesses may enter into a payment plan to distribute up to $50,000 of sales tax that's due over a 12-month period. So to distribute that over a 12-month period beginning in July of 2020, and the final payment must be submitted by July of 2021. So they do have to start making monthly payments beginning this July. So the city's anticipated exposure is approximately $195,000 due to this executive order. And the utility users tax, that's trending about $500,000 under what we had anticipated for the budget. Business license tax, $250,000 drop. There just represents new businesses coming online after the month of April, making the assumption that there will be no new business license tax for that. The bulk of our business license tax is collected in December and January. Fines and forfeitures, this represents a $220,000 decline for this category. That's primarily due to parking citations not being issued right now. We're assuming that the stay-at-home orders will remain in place for a while and parking citations will cease. Property tax, a decline of $217,000. So the city does receive property tax payments in 4 payments from the county: December, January, April, and May. Our December, January, and April payments all came in as anticipated. The May payment, I am anticipating an increase in the delinquency rate, and that's what that $217,000 represents. To go over the $6.2 million in appropriation reductions, that is broken down by 3 major components. Salary and benefits, we've identified $3.1 million in appropriation reductions. Maintenance and operations, we've identified $1.3 million in appropriation reductions. And in capital improvement projects, we've identified $1.8 million in deferral projects that will be deferred into 2021. So staff has identified a total appropriation reduction of $3.1 million for salary and benefits. We have a current vacancy rate of about 12% with the city. That represents 33 full-time positions. In our current budget, we had adopted a 5% vacancy rate, or the equivalent of about 14 vacant positions. So we do have 19 vacant positions over what the adopted budget had included. And this represents a total of about $2.6 million. Also, a selective hiring freeze will remain in place for the remainder of 2019-20 with scenario 1. Also, due to recreation of park and library programs not being shuttered, being shuttered for the months of March through May, there will be salary savings for part-time staff. There's approximately 125 seasonal part-time positions that are currently not being paid, and this represents about $475,000 in savings. For maintenance and operations, staff, again, has identified $1.3 million in appropriation reductions. The categories here, we've broken them down: professional services, $827,000. Utilities such as gas utilities for heating the pools, so we've stopped heating the pools for the months of March, April, and May. And then fuel savings for gasoline for our fleet vehicles, about $150,000 in savings there. Travel and training budgets throughout different departments, appropriation reduction of $275,000. Then emergency repairs, about $43,000 reduction there. And we do have about $300,000 budgeted this year for emergency repairs. Based on City Council's direction to defer non-essential capital improvement projects, along with looking at those projects which do not have legal commitments To continue to move forward, staff is recommending deferring 5 projects listed in red until fiscal year 2021. So these projects are the Teen Center for $800,000, City Hall window replacement for $450,000, fiber vault lid replacement for $150,000. And what's key to note there was $300,000 adopted in the current budget for this project. $150,000 has already been completed. Acacia Park construction for $300,000, and the fitness trail at Memory Row for $100,000. So this does represent deferral of $1.8 million into the following year, with continuing with $949,000 for the current year. The City Council have any questions at this time? So I am going to turn it over to our interim Public Works Director, Mr. Mark Watkins. He's going to do a capital improvement program, what we've completed so far the current year.
Thank you, Mr. Lilio. Good evening, Mayor Boyles and members of City Council. I'm not sure if my video is up yet. Hopefully you can hear the audio at least.
We can hear you loud and clear, Mark.
Okay, great. So, yeah, this will be a brief kind of mid-year update on where the capital projects are. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is consistent with the, back a slide, Council Strategic Plan, goal number 4 of quality infrastructure and technology, and supporting El Segundo's physical infrastructure and an appealing, safe, and effective community. Just a quick reminder, capital projects don't always follow a fiscal year. When we go through the design, bid, build process, projects often take longer than 12 months. And so the projects that I'm showing you that are completed, many of them will say carryover. That means that they were funded in the previous fiscal year. And then some of the ones that we're showing were funded and completed this fiscal year, and I'll kind of point those out as we go. But the example would be the one you just accepted as complete, the Washington Park Playground. That's a project I'll show you a couple of pictures about, but that was one that was actually funded in the previous fiscal year, 1920. So next slide, please. So these are the projects that are either completed or will be completed very soon. I'll go through a couple of before and after pictures also, but they include the Washington Park Playground, McCarthy Court Street improvements, the sidewalk project, fiber vault lid replacement, and the 1819 carryover that pavement rehab. And next slide. Also the Slurry Seal project, the Community Development Block Grant accessibility project for city parking facilities, and the final one that was completed relatively recently was the Cedar Street water main replacement. So the other projects that are, next slide please, that are in the mix that are currently going through design and are being prepared for the bidding process would include our City Hall window replacement. That project, oops, I think you went one slide ahead of me already there, Joe. The City Hall windows and the security project, for that project, the architect has been hired. The renderings have been completed. That project, as per Mr. Lilio's previous slide, has been put on hold until next year, but we will complete the design and have that ready to go. The Library Park project is ready to proceed. And then the Plunge Pool rehabilitation, on that project, the RFPs have been received. They're in the process of being reviewed now. The next step would be interviewing for the design consultant and then proceeding with the design, and then the construction, as previously stated, would be held until a future year. Next slide. The police firing range improvements. The next slide would be, those were awarded by the City Council in March. Contract has been entered into, and that project is proceeding. The catch basin inserts is also proceeding. That is a project required by our stormwater quality permits. And then the Acacia Park project is one that has gone through the design, was ready to go to City Council for bid, and is currently being held until the next fiscal year for construction. So with that, I'll go through just a few of the before and after pictures. You want to go to the next slide. Washington Park Playground. Here's a before picture, 30-year-old structure. The sand down below does not provide for ADA access, and so this park was upgraded. Next picture shows the upgrades during construction. And then the final slide of Washington Park will show how it looks completed. With the synthetic turf, the new paths, there's some new tables and benches. This project, as you're all well aware, the fencing is still up. It would have been ready and been open to the public by this point in time, but because of the current orders, we've just gone ahead and left the fencing up, and we will be happy to take it down and introduce this new park to the public as soon as it's safe to do so. The next couple of slides are of the city facilities. We did parking lot improvements at all city facilities, including library, city hall, fire stations. Most of these were simple as striping, but in some cases we had to improve the ADA access ramps and make sure that all of our facilities met the ADA requirements. And there's the final picture. Next picture is some street improvements that were done on McCarthy Court. This is a typical type of sidewalk disruption that you'll see that occurs generally due to a street tree. In this case also, there was no gutter on the street, so the asphalt went straight to the curb. So the sidewalk was removed, curb and gutter was put back in place, and then the final project was done. And so now you have better drainage and a safer walking environment on the sidewalk. On the next slide, on the fiber fault lids, as council is well aware, the city does own a fiber optic network. There was a number of vaults in the streets. One of them had failed, and there was a temporary steel plate that had been put on that vault for a number of months. So the project was to replace all those vaults with vaults that are appropriate for a street. So here's a project during construction, and then the final look of how those vaults look afterwards. And then the final project is our pavement rehab. This involved a whole number of streets. So just a few before and afters. We don't show all of them, but here's Cedar Street. If you look on the right, that's actually the trench where the water line was. So the water line project went in first, and then when that was done, the street was paved. So you can see the street paved curb to curb. Same thing on Maple Avenue. Next slide, you can see where the trench is, and then the street's paved, and should last quite a while on that. Same with Center Street. So you can see kind of a before and after on Center. You can see the cracking and the poor condition of the street. And then after the pavement rehabilitation and the paving, the street looks like it should look. And the same thing with Mariposa Avenue at the end, kind of a before and after. You can see a street that's falling apart and then a street that's been paved. So those are the projects that have been recently completed for this mid-year update. I'm happy to answer any questions or hold those questions to the end. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Watkins? Okay, doesn't appear so. Joe, back to you.
Okay, to go over the other revenues. So these are the non-general fund revenues. Start off with special revenue funds. So bulk of these special revenue funds are transportation related. Transportation funds were on track to meet the current year revenue budget prior to COVID-19. COVID-19 had a negative impact on these transportation funds. Since most of the funds are based on sales tax and gas taxes, there will be a negative impact for the second half of the fiscal year. Magnitude of COVID-19 on fuel consumption and therefore tax collections and allocations will depend on many as yet unknown factors, including the impact of the disease itself, continued restrictions by the federal and state governments on activities, and changes in transportation choices throughout recovery. So as telecommuting may ease up, or if that continues to be the norm for many businesses, that will obviously have impact on transportation funds. Price of gasoline being very low currently compared to historic norms, that will have a negative impact as well. Many of the larger road transportation projects in California will be curtailed for several months to come. The timing and funding of the city's Park Place transportation project, for example, may be negatively impacted. So we won't know the impact on transportation funding and probably till the end of May, early June. However, most of our transportation funds, we do have healthy fund balances where it's typically 2 to 3 years of revenues built up there. So we do have enough funding to continue with the current year's projects. Our debt service fund. The debt service fund records the city's facility lease activity for the Douglas Street gap closure. The revenue for this fund comes from the traffic mitigation fees. The general fund does not support any revenue or expenditure activities within a debt service fund. Budget for fiscal year 1920 was $545,000 for principal and interest payments. The debt service fund is on target to meet both the revenue and expenditure amounts. Enterprise funds, I'll start off with the water fund. Revenues are on track with the budget. The expenses are about $800,000 higher due to planning of capital projects. So this is just a snapshot of where we're at. So again, the second quarter revenues, we're almost halfway through what we adopted in the budget. And a lot of that is timing issues, so we are anticipated to come in right around the adopted budget of $31.2 million for revenues. Expenditures, we have $12.5 million spent so far. Again, some of this is timing issues as well with billing from West Basin and some pending capital projects. But if all the capital projects continue, we are expected to come in at around $29.8 million in expenditures. Wastewater fund, again, revenues are on track with budget. And the expenditures right now are currently trending under the budget, and that's primarily due to capital projects that are pending. Golf course fund, revenues through March 30th were $563,000, or about 38% of the budget for the second quarter. Due to the decreased operation hours, so we were anticipating the conversion to the Topgolf facility, and the unexpected timing of COVID-19 pandemic, the operation of the golf course has been shuttered. So no new revenues have been coming in since the middle of March. Expenses of $690,000 are about 49% of budget. And currently, the golf fund has a net operating loss of approximately just under $22,000 per month. Equipment replacement fund, so this is trending under budget. The general liability insurance fund, this is trending right in line with the adopted budget. Workers' compensation fund, so this is currently trending higher than budget halfway through the year. This fund will be closely monitored to determine if future budget adjustments are necessary. And to touch on the impact that COVID-19 may potentially have on CalPERS. So as of December 2019, CalPERS was trending at a 5% return. March 20th, they were at a negative 4% return. And I was just on a CalPERS webinar today where their CFO and CIO gave a presentation. They are anticipating through June, which is their fiscal year end, June 30, to have a loss of 1%. So as of the end of April, they were actually at 1% loss. Now their target rate is 7%, that's their discount rate. So they're actually 8% below their target rate. And to put things in perspective, the Great Recession, CalPERS had a negative return in 08 of a negative 4.9%, in 09, negative 23.4%. .com bubble burst in 2001, CalPERS had a negative return of 7.2%, and in 02, negative 5.9%. So as June 30 comes around, and if they maintain that negative 1% return, this will have an impact on the city's finances not until fiscal year 22-23. There is a 2-year delay on the impact. If that loss, again, holds at negative 1% or 8% below their discount rate, that will be amortized over 20 years. There's first 5 years are ramped up slowly, and then the last 15 years of that amortization schedule are even payments. And here's what that would look like. So year one, which again, that would be 2 years from now, there would be an additional payment of about $554,000 to CalPERS. Year 2, 23, 24, about a $1.1 million additional payment. 1.7 million additional payment in year 3, 2.2 million additional payment in year 4, and in years 5 through 20, an additional $2.8 million per year to CalPERS. Again, that's due to if they maintain that negative 1% return. What that has, the impact that has on additional unfunded liability is $22.1 million. And it equates to about $30 million in payments, so it's $22.1 million in principal unfunded liability and about $8 million in interest to CalPERS. So this is a recap of the economic recovery scenario 1. Again, we're anticipating about $9.6 million revenue loss. Again, that has the virus the restrictions slowly easing in May and economic recovery slowly coming back online in July. We've identified appropriation reductions of about $6.2 million and no use of any reserves to accommodate that. So staff recommendation for City Council is to approve the proposed fiscal year 2019-20 general fund revenue and appropriation adjustment based on the economic recovery scenario 1 model. Over the course of the remaining 5 months through September, staff will closely continue to monitor recurring revenue and expenditures to ensure the budget remains balanced. And I have my staff reporting on a spreadsheet every revenue that comes in, and it's live time, so I'm looking at this constantly every day. We will maintain selective hiring freezes through the end of the year, and there has been a vacancy review committee set up, which consists of the city manager, the HR director, and the finance director, myself.
Hey, Joe?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, if you don't mind, can I talk about the upcoming budget process?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So Joe did a great job walking you through the revenue impacts of COVID-19 to date, the different scenarios and why we use scenario number 1. And Mark Watkins also did a good job going over the capital improvement projects and our special revenue funds. Now, when it comes to next year's budget, we're recommending that we focus on scenario 1 for now. And we're going to be looking at this weekly, monthly, definitely quarterly. And we'll have to see if scenario 2 or 3 kick in. But let's just assume for now that scenario 1 will play out. As we prepare the budget for next year, well, right now, for the rest of this year, we're going to use the selective hiring freeze and vacancy review committee, as well as our constant review of the expenses and revenues as depicted in front of you. Go to the next PowerPoint page, Joe. So you may ask, well, what are you doing about next year's budget in terms of the preparation for that? And we will be in front of you shortly on this. So here are the budget balancing tools that we're exploring right now. These are in somewhat random order. This is not in order of preference, so please don't read anything into the order. And it's not necessarily a comprehensive list, but it's a pretty good list. It has it does illustrate tools that are in any city's toolbox. But here's what we're looking at. We're going to take a look at our existing labor contracts. Now we know if we're going to even contemplate or if we're going to recommend doing any of this, we have to meet and confer with the unions. So we get that and we would work with them. But that is an option to take a look at the existing contracts and the adjustments that are scheduled to come up over the next couple of years. Use of furloughs, including the winter holiday furlough from Christmas to New Year. We're exploring these. We don't have any recommendations on the table now, but we certainly are exploring this option. Voluntary reduction in hours. Some cities give employees the option if they want to reduce their hours and their department head says, hey, that can work. So you might have individuals who work in a job where they can go from 40 hours to 36 and not be paid for the 40, but be paid for the 36. That's an option. That's just a hypothetical example that I used there. Further position reductions, we'll have to take a look at this. Right now, we're essentially freezing some of the vacant positions. We could take a look at freezing them for a longer period of time or actually removing them completely from the budget. Another example is the increased use of private contracts and privatization of services. This is a viable option. We understand there are some challenges in doing this, but it's an option. Regionalization of services, maybe partnering with other cities or the county or forming a JPA to do a wider array of services, it's an option. I know there's a history of attempting to do this and going to the voters and so on. We are not advocating this. We are just making the council aware it is an option. Over the last decade, maybe 20 years, but definitely since the Great Recession, 2008 to 2010, a number of cities and counties and special districts have done this. And there's a lot of examples in LA County alone. We can take a look at additional pension reform options, and this city council needs to be recognized for your tremendous leadership in this area. And the finance director showed you earlier how at the end of each fiscal year we do, I think that number, Joe, was 1.5 million. And we do an annual additional payment above and beyond what we're obligated to pay for the pensions. And what we are obligated to pay, that does rise every year for a number of years. We are on track, if we stay the course over the next 2 decades, to ultimately resolve our pension obligations. But as the cost rises every year, that becomes a little more painful in terms of balancing the budget. But we certainly can take a look at some additional reform options. Then across the board appropriation cuts. That too can be an option. Next page, please. Continued deferred maintenance is an option. We don't recommend that, but that's certainly a tool. That's the old classic saying, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. That would be a benefit now, but significant cost increase down the road. Service reductions, we can continue looking at that. Also on this, so we talked a lot about how you can save money, how you can cut expenditures. On the flip side, grow the revenues. We can certainly look at going to the voters to do increases for sales tax, utility user tax, the business license fees, that type of thing. Along the same lines is not in terms of recurring revenues, but certainly we have revenues. We have the general fund, reserves, excuse me for that. The use of the general fund reserves, we have a 17 to 18% reserve right now. You can certainly tap into those funds. And you may also look at using the economic uncertainty reserve, which right now is at $2 million. If we go to scenario 2, we are recommending tapping into $1 million of the uncertainty reserve. There's, I already mentioned revenue enhancements, right? Sorry, I got sidetracked there. And then ultimately, we are looking at a citywide reorganization to achieve more efficient operations. So the last one there, we are spending time doing that, and we will have a reorganization of sorts in front of you as part of the budget process for next year. There are also some other items that are to be determined. That's a good laundry list, and I wanted you to know, as your city manager, we are taking this very seriously. I've had a number of discussions with the executive team, the department heads, and we are also taking a good look at what other cities, counties, and local governments are doing in this area. We go to the next slide. By the way, this is not a fun topic. We don't relish having to be in the situation we're in, but a good forward-thinking organization will do this. Our next steps, we'll have the strategic plan study session coming up in July. The council needs to be commended for doing your 3-year strategic plan, and we come to you every year to update it. We are not recommending a wholesale change to that because your strategic plan is quite comprehensive. We've made a lot of progress. We have a long way to go. So we'll recommend tweaking that a little bit, but we're focusing mainly on getting through the next fiscal year financially. Then in August, we'll have the annual budget study session with the council. We may be in front of you sooner when we do the 9-month review of the budget. So do note that. Then the annual budget public hearing will be on September 15th. At the same time here, the finance director is moving forward with a long-term financial strategic plan. He has selected a firm to do this. Right now, we don't do long-term financial strategic planning. We do a 3-year capital improvement program budget where we are shifting to look at doing 10 to 20-year plans, not just for capital, but for operations as well. So with that, council, that concludes the staff presentation. Both the finance director and myself and the other department heads are available if you have further questions for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitnick and Mr. Lilly. I know you've been working tirelessly on this effort as it relates to the budget. Do we have questions from the council? Councilmember Drew.
There we go. Now I'm unmuted. Sorry about that. First of all, thank you very much. It's a very comprehensive and really thought out report. It took a lot of work. I know that. These are uncertain times, and I appreciate your staff's efforts on this, because basically you're trying to hit a constantly moving target in a very fluid situation. And in a situation where we generally don't have too much say in what goes on. We almost have to be reactionary in a lot of these cases, and that's not very easy to do. There are precious few things that you can control during a pandemic like this, and I think you've done a great job with it. And honestly, I am in favor of what your recommendations are. But I do have one thing on this I'd like to talk about, and that is basically when you get down to back, I think it was slide 14. On your capital improvement plan and deferrals. Firstly, I agree on moving the teen center to the next budget cycle for discussion, because while it's very important to the community, we're really still in the initial phase of trying to reimagine what that will be and how it will run. It's really not ready for an RFP process at this point, so I think it makes a lot of sense to move that out, especially since it is a big line item. I do, however, believe that these other items on the list should be done currently, in the current budget year, and as we had kind of initially talked about. And here's why. A few different reasons, but one, like for example, the Acacia Park program, the fitness trail project as well. They're important to the community. I mean, you saw that picture of Washington Square Park and that new facility out there, and these are really kind of community pride projects. And I think that especially in a time like this, we need things like that. The City Hall window replacement and the fiber vault lids, those are not, necessarily popular projects, but they're necessary projects. We've been kicking a lot of these things down the road for a very long time. And I believe it's really important to kind of get involved with that and take care of it now while we can. Construction costs are down. Competition for construction projects is strong. A lot of people want the business. We have the ability to take advantage of that right now in this market, and I think we should utilize that leverage. Construction projects create jobs, and they also create residual business within the city. With these construction projects, come more workers in town, more people to buy things from our restaurants and retail, which is also going to be an important part of the recovery. Getting these things done now keeps them off the books for the next budget cycle, where we may be facing an even more difficult economic situation depending on what happens over the next few months. So, and more importantly, I've never been a proponent in business or otherwise, or I've never really experienced a situation where you can cut your way to prosperity. I think we need to push forward as a city and help ourselves out during the recovery. So I know the next question is going to be how do you propose to pay for that in this current cycle? In the end, we're talking about $1 million for these projects that were left for deferral. I propose that we consider looking at a couple different things. One is we form our own stimulus package, basically for the city, whereby we utilize the money from the Economic Uncertainty Fund, which is about $2 million, or we look at adjusting the additional pension payment we're making this year, which is about 1.6 million, or a combination of both. Maybe take a bit out of one, a bit out of the other, and keep things going. I believe our community will benefit more from spending the money on these tangible items that are sorely needed. The Economic Uncertainty Fund can be refilled as we get stronger and as the economy improves down the road, as again, this is a fluid situation. I really believe we need to think about moving forward on this. You know, there's a saying, and we've all said it, that when all is said and done, the only people you can truly rely upon is your family in times of trouble. In this situation right now, when all is said and done, neither the state nor the county are going to go right in and pour money into our general fund. I think we need to do what we can while we can to help take care of ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Giroux. Any other comments? Yes, Councilmember Perstein.
So on the lines of what Councilman Giroux is talking about, you know, one of the things that always comes up is also the plunge. I noticed it's not listed here, but I just wanted we as a city to talk about, you know, that we are moving forward with the design phase. I know we were pushing the monies into next fiscal year as far as construction, but we're not stopping that project. And I just want the city to talk about that.
Okay, Mr. Mitnick.
Yes, sir. Am I on? You can hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you. In the interim Public Works Director, Mark Watkins' presentation, I believe he did list page 19 of the PowerPoint for testing you to see if you look at every page. In there, he did list the plunge pool rehab project. There was a budget for that from, I believe, a previous year, I think $1 million or some large number, or a number of some sort. It wasn't enough to do it, and we do have a grant from Chevron. So we are planning on coming back to council with design and then to come and have options to pay for it. So that project is not dead by any means. It's still in the works. And Mark Watkins, if you want to chime in and clarify that, or some other staff member, that would be helpful.
Well, I know that pre-COVID-19, we had come up with the timeline of, you know, when we were going to look at the design, present the design, and the whole process is about an 18-month process just to start construction. And I think the city needs to hear that we are still moving on that timeline, and that we are going out doing an RFP or RFQ for the design, because the cost to do that is quite small. So just because we're closed for COVID-19 doesn't mean we shouldn't be moving forward with the plunge and ensuring that we do rehabilitation on the project, on the plunge.
Mr. Mayor, members, we hear you, and we'll do a better job getting the word out about the plunge. We can certainly put that on our webpage, and we could follow up accordingly. And I'm trying to see that's coming back to council on an upcoming.
Mark Watkins, or do you want me to give that quick update?
Yeah, because it's coming to council in June. Go ahead, Mark, if that's okay with the mayor. Thank you.
Sure. So, yeah, where we are in the process is we sent out a request for proposals for architects to submit to do the design work on this project. We received a number of proposals. I think there's around 10 or 12. Staff and 2 members of the Recreation and Parks Commission are currently reviewing those proposals. They will invite the top 4 or 5 for interviews, and then based upon that, we will come to council and recommend an award of the design portion of the contract. That will start the official design. And then you're right, it'll take a number of that for them to do the design. It is obviously a historic, older structure, and so finding an architectural firm that has experience with those lines, that also has experience in engaging the community, will be very important, so that we make sure that the project that's delivered meets the city's needs and also is something that the city can afford to maintain over the long run, and that they answer as many questions. Oftentimes in those kind of historic projects, you can run into a number of cost overruns. We want someone who's got experience with those types of projects. So that'll be coming to you probably within about a month for award of the design, and we can certainly do a more detailed description of the project and answer more questions at that time.
Right.
Carol,
and,
good with that, Carol? Okay.
Yeah, and that's a multi-million-dollar project. I was looking at the CIP book showing $1 million appropriated to date, and looking at finding another $1 million and then $1.5 million. So we'll follow up with a memo to council as well, clarifying the plunge, where we are, and we'll get the word out on the website. Thank you, City Council. Appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. I think I saw Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel reaching for his device. Chris, no?
No, I was just pulling up my display. I'm
Okay.
okay, thank you.
All right, good. All right, any other, yes, Councilman Nickel.
Based upon Councilmember Giroux's comments on that slide 14, I know this is not the time or the place to discuss it or make a motion on any of this. Is this CIP deferral, is this something that we can bring back at the next meeting, agendize it, and actually discuss it as a council item by item?
Mr. Mitnick, yeah.
Council, you have flexibility if you want to make revisions to that, and then let's just say, for sake of discussion, you wanted to keep the fitness trail alive, an extra 100,000. You could tell us, hey, well, let's stay the course with that. Go find another $100,000 in savings elsewhere. We could do that, or you could take it out of reserve. So you could give us direction today. We're happy to come back at another meeting if you'd like to do that as well.
Councilman Nickel, I think we should discuss the merits now as a group. I think time's of the essence that we've been talking about this particular table for 3 or 4 different sessions. So, did you want to provide your thoughts, Councilman Nickel?
My thoughts is Acacia Park construction, we should move forward with that. It's been a long time coming, and it's just something that I think we should prioritize now and try to stick to the schedule that Director Pettit from Recreation and Parks had proposed to us earlier this year. The other projects I still think should be on hold.
Thank you, sir. And I was going to suggest that the only one really that strikes me as really being urgent in the minds of our residents who live on the west side of town near Mayor Pro Tem, been very patient about is Acacia Park. We considered the pool. I struggle with the police firing range remodel. I know we're further along in the contract and that those funds are directed only towards police type expenses. But to me, that feels like more of a discretionary spend. And I certainly do not want to use any reserves for any of these capital improvement projects in scenario 1. That's my stance. Yeah, Councilman Drew.
So I guess my question is this, and I get it. I mean, you don't want to dig into reserves for as long as you can, but I can't think of a more kind of dictionary definition of what an economic uncertainty is than right now. If we're ever going to use anything out of that fund, I would imagine during a mass pandemic, it would be kind of one of the top qualifiers for it. And this, in the end, is our projects that directly affect the city and the community. And that's why I think there, other than the teen center, which we're really not ready for, and for the plunge, which is not up here, I don't see why we wouldn't take advantage of the leverage that we have right now just in going out for the RFPs on it, because you might find out that 450 is not 450. You might find out that 300 is not 300. I think we have a limited time frame to take advantage of the marketplace, and I think we should look into it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Councilmember Persto.
So I'm going to agree with Councilman Nickel and Giroux that we should move forward with the Acacia Park. I do feel as we look at the restructuring of our of the city departments, that they may find some additional funds that will help offset that cost.
Thank you. Just to clarify, Councilmember Giroux is in favor of doing the windows and other items as well. I was in favor of the park.
So I'm just in favor of doing the Acacia Park.
Okay, thank you. But looking for, without tapping into reserves, Carol, is that what you're saying?
Well, I do think, I think that the city needs to continue to look at the organizational structure, especially since we had over 50 IT initiatives implemented in the last 4 years. I'm sure that there is some opportunities where job descriptions could be modified and consolidated or repurposed. So I think that you could find some additional funding there.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So we have consensus. Mayor Pro Tem or Councilmember Giroux, would you like to weigh in on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I think that we have put the staff in a bit of a pickle in that they were given pretty specific guidance to not tap into economic uncertainty, and as a result have found money elsewhere. If we are going to tinker with the recommendations, I think we are in some ways obligated to tell them where to find the funding, because I think to your point earlier, we are at the decision point for these things. This economic situation is unfolding around us, and we need to make a decision about how we're going to allocate our funds going through the rest of this fiscal year. I would say that if we are going to dig back into this and pick projects that we want, I think we're sort of obligated to give some recommendation about how they're funded. I would hate to send them out of here with the dreaded unfunded mandate of spend $300,000 in the park and then figure out how to pay for it elsewhere. I think that if we are going to manipulate this, which I personally, although some of these things I find enormous value in, I would say that if we are not going to tap into the economic uncertainty reserve, I would go with the model as presented.
Okay, well, let's turn over to Mr. Mitnick. Mr. Mitnick, do you have some reasonable assurance from Mr. Lilio that if we decided to do, like, for example, Acacia Park construction, that you could find the funds without tapping into the uncertainty reserves, or where's your comfort level? Would you prefer that we stick with the list as is?
For the $300,000 for Acacia Park, we could come up with an additional reduction elsewhere. It's really a policy decision for City Council. If you're looking for a recommendation from us, I would say the use of the Economic Uncertainty Reserve for a one-time capital line item is better than for a recurring salary or operating expense. So it's really your comfort level. I would, if you said no to the use of the Economic Uncertainty Reserve or the General Reserve, then I would say we would reduce the contribution to the Equipment Replacement Fund by $300,000. That would be my recommendation, rather than freezing another position or cutting elsewhere. We would have to make up that Equipment Replacement Fund contribution later down the road, but that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. To me, using reserves to pay for a capital improvement is kind of like selling an asset to fund an operating expense. It feels equally bad. And I want to I think we're painting a better picture than our surrounding cities, but you just don't have to look more than 12 miles to the north to see that Santa Monica laid off 500 people. Now, granted, they're a much bigger city, and they were in their current state was different than ours going into COVID-19. But we also hear economists saying that we could have double-digit GDP negative growth for consecutive quarters. And we worked really hard to build an uncertainty fund and a set of reserves, despite one of our council members saying over and over again, we don't need that money, we should spend that money. This is a new norm. When we know that every 9 to 11 years, there are cycles in economies. So be it COVID-19 or something else, I believe we're bound to have a correction, and we don't know what our future is going to hold. But imagine if 20% of our revenue is gone next year, when the vast majority of our budget is in salaries and benefits. I just think to spend any money right now with such a dismal view, no fault of our own, to the future would be a travesty after working as hard as we have. So I'm kind of torn now between what Mayor Pro Tem said and what we started with. Based on what I heard Chris say, I'd say we stick with, my personal opinion now at this point is we stick with it. We just go forward with what staff recommended and not do Acacia Park construction if it means we're spending money on using our reserves. Councilman Nickel.
So, as you know, because you're well versed in this, if we move forward and say go out and get bids for Acacia Park, they're going to go out, they're going to put it out to bid. That bid is going to have to come back to us for approval. At said time that comes back, if we are now looking at more of a scenario 2 or scenario 3 for recovery, like, this conversation may change. You know, I just believe right now at this moment, I think we move forward with bids on Acacia Park. And let's see if Councilmember Giroux is correct and that 300,000 is actually 200 or 250, or God forbid it's 500, right? it's still going to come back to us, and we're going to then have a better understanding as to what is this recovery going to look like. Like Chief Donovan said earlier, it's a dimmer switch, not a light switch. So I think putting this out to bid, bringing it back to us it's not a bad thing. It's staff resources, but it's not necessarily us spending money at this time. To the point of reserves, I would be comfortable at this point giving direction to staff to go out to bid. If it comes back, obviously trying to find that money without tapping into reserves, but if we had to tap into that reserve for $300,000 for, you know, the northwest corner of town that has bared the burden of a pump project that went over budget and twice as long, a council that has struggled with the concept of keeping a pool or getting rid of a pool at the park, and then to finally have a timeline where their park is going to be there in the fall, just taken out from underneath them. I just think it's just wrong, and it's $300,000 based upon the amount of money we have saved as a city. It's a drop in the bucket. It's not reoccurring. It's one time, and I think we should move forward with at least getting the bids.
I support getting the bids. We have a third.
My question would be then, if we're using that analysis for one thing, we don't use it for the others? You know, Mr. Mayor just said that you talked about, I can't exactly remember the exact quote, but pulling out of reserves was analogous to, I can't remember the exact thing, but.
I'm not suggesting we use reserves.
Oh, but he's suggesting use reserves.
I said I'm comfortable with a bid. I'm absolutely not comfortable using reserves. That's
okay. So then, would we be comfortable doing bids on all of them? Are we hurt by even knowing that information? To Councilman Nichols' point, it doesn't mean that in the end we might have to sit here and sit a situation 3 months down the road that we can't do any of them. But wouldn't it be nice just to have the information to be able to act on?
Well, let's ask Mr. Mitnick, what is the burden like to get bids, collect bids? Maybe it's not significant on 10 projects as opposed to one.
Council, if we go to bid for a public works construction project, we should be prepared to award the bid if it comes within budget. It would be frowned upon if we go out to do bids and then we get a responsive bid within the budget and we don't go forward. There's some challenges and issues with that. Now, if the bids come in higher and or we face a crisis, then we could probably get out of it. But I would just caution you from doing that. If you want to do these projects, all of them, or you want to do Acacia, we can get the funding for these without using the reserves or the economic uncertainty reserve. You just tell us what you would like to do. I would recommend using the equipment replacement funds by lowering our contribution to that at this point in time to pay for one or more of these projects. Ideally, I'd like to use reserves, but I'm not sensing a majority support for that. So direct us accordingly, but if you go to bid, be prepared to award it, because the integrity of the process matters out there. So if we go out to bid for a project, the people bidding have to feel confident that we will award the project if it comes within the budget.
Councilmember Giroux.
Based on the information, Scott, I appreciate that clarity on that. I don't want to put us in a situation where we're losing integrity in the process. If the common theme up here or the agreement is that we take your proposal here, you know, in its entirety, with the exception being fine $300,000 for the Acacia Park project without tipping into reserves, I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Giroux. Councilmember Perstuck, you had raised your hand earlier. I don't know if it was to say approval on that last notion. You want to clarify, please?
Yes.
Sorry, you're in favor of finding money for Acacia Park as well?
Yes. Well, I'm in favor of going out to bid, finding out what the bid is, and then trying to look for the money within our reorganization. And then at that time, when the bids finally come, we can identify what steps we want to take to fund it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
But I'm confident that we're going to find money.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I support that same thing, which is consistent with what I said earlier. So, any other thoughts?
Do you need a motion?
Yeah, well, there's several actually. We have two before us. Let's knock out, Scott, we can go through motions A and B, right? Receive and file on the general fund mid-year budget update and amend the revenues and the appropriations, and then come to the decision on the capital improvement.
So A, you just need council consensus. And
Do we
then
have-
B is the one that requires your motion, and that's Exhibit A, if Joe wants to pull that up.
Okay, let's go to A first. Do we have consensus on receiving and filing the 2019-2020 general fund mid-year budget update? Anyone opposed? Okay, good. All right, Joe, you want to pull that one up then, please?
Tracy, it's not part of the presentation, so I don't have.
Here's the language I have.
Okay.
Amend
sorry
fiscal
about that,
year.
Joe.
Amend fiscal year 2019-2020 general fund revenues from $76,710,208 to $67,107,993, and appropriations from $80,782,540 to $74,595,883, as itemized in Exhibit A, which I don't see, but I think we're just confirming that the budget, the revenues and the expenses appropriations have been changed. Is that correct, Joe?
That is correct. And I do have, there's specific account numbers in there that we're actually reducing the appropriations from.
Do we need to mention those, Madam Clerk?
No, you're good because they're in the exhibit.
Okay, good. So we just need a motion on approval on the last one. Anyone?
Stuck the
Nichols,
move.
so moved.
Thank you. I think I heard, Carol, is that you also?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Forsythe moved, Nichols second.
Okay, great. Okay, Madam Clerk, voice vote.
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nickel.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Aye.
So sorry, Chris. Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel
Aye.
and Mayor Boyles.
Yes. Okay, getting back to the item on the CIP. Thank you. It's 5-0, right, Tracy?
Yes.
Thank you. Getting back to the CIP item, I think Councilmember Giroux was okay with getting a bid on Acacia Park, right? And then seeing what comes back with that and hopefully finding the funds. And I think you said you're okay with not using the reserves.
Correct.
Okay, Carol, you said the same thing. I said the same thing. That's 3. Councilman Nickel and Mayor Pro Tem, do you want to add any comments before we move forward?
No, I'm comfortable.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem?
I would prefer to use the economic uncertainty reserve because I think that's what it's here for. That's my contribution to this, but I would not oppose.
Okay. Scott, Mr. Minnick, do you have enough there? You have direction? You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. For clarification, so the motion perhaps would be direct staff to move forward or to come back with seeking authorization to do the construction bids for Acacia Park and provide the funding for it.
Yes.
So we would like to have we can clarify where the funding will come from. We go out to get bids, see what the bids are, then make a decision.
Yes, sir. That's what I heard. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, good discussion. All right, we are on to City Clerk reports.
None this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. City Treasurer, is anyone on? Is Matthew on or? No, right? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Giroux.
Just one quick one. Just want to say happy 50th birthday to Mr. Jim Kirker. Please be kind to your liver this evening.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Nickel.
I will concur. Happy birthday, Cinco de Kirker. 50 today. You're a very old man. Congratulations. I also wanted to put it out to the community, somewhat of a kindness challenge. I think you've seen this going around where like post an act of kindness. let's lead with kindness. Let's be slow to judge. Everyone's taken a different approach to coming out of this and the recovery. And I think that's going to be a very challenging time for our community. And I would rather our community exit this pandemic stronger and more bound together than separating. So let's lead with kindness, post your pictures, hashtag El Segundo kindness or something fun like that. And let's just fill all of our Facebook feeds with photos of people being kind or kind actions versus COVID-19 numbers like I fill your feed with. Thank you, Mr. Boyles.
Thank you, Councilmember Nickel. Okay, Councilmember Perstock.
Yes, to Scott, Councilmember Nichols' point, we are all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. So please, be kind to everybody on their decisions and don't judge. But I did want to bring up, now that everybody's actually out and about walking El Segundo, I really want to propose that we add something to our website called Beautiful El Segundo, where people could submit, things that they see. If they see something that's overgrown or something that's positive, that they could submit it to the city so that we can take care of it. And they become our eyes and ears to ensure that El Segundo is as beautiful as we want it to be.
Cool. I like that. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Perstock. Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Nothing to report, Mr. Mayor.
And I just be really quick. I want to commend staff. I know they continue to work long hours, and also the council. Council, I think, has done a tremendous job putting information out. Carol, you, Scott, everybody in the council just continues to disseminate information for the town. And I know that the staff gets a lot of accolades in terms of the job that they're doing to get the word out. And other cities are noticing as well. So thank you to everybody working really hard on this, and stay safe. Have a great night. And let's see, City Attorney, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Hensley, yeah.
Going to use this opportunity to do something I never do. I want to say happy birthday to my wife. Couldn't do as much for her. It was a big one. Not a lot you can do in a pandemic, but one more try. Happy birthday, honey.
Nice. You got some points there. Well done. City Manager. Scott, you're muted.
I apologize for that, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So we'll follow up on the two emails on the exemption issue for our employees. We'll follow up on that. And also, speaking of our employees, first, I want to extend appreciation and thanks to the City Council for your leadership, wisdom, and support as we were working our way through the budget situation and the COVID-19 impacts. But I also like to acknowledge the 365 or so full-time equivalent employees who are really impacted too. They're working very hard, long hours. There's a lot of uncertainty and angst that they're confronting, just like with our residents, several who have been impacted quite significantly by this situation. We're all in this together. We're all working really hard, and we will continue to do so going forward. So I'd just like to acknowledge their efforts. By way of the forecast, the next agenda will be on May 19th. We will come back with the Acacia Pool authorization to go out and get the construction bids, and we'll have a funding recommendation for you on that. Looking at the agenda forecast, we'll have another COVID-19 update. And we'll have the first reading on the public hearing on the wireless cell sites. We're obligated to keep that moving along. And we'll have the fiscal year that ended, the annual financial report presentation will be on that agenda. Oh, by the way, this Thursday the council will have a closed session following up on the two items that you were talking about tonight, including the COVID-19 update. So that's it by way of city manager follow-up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And then we have a memorial to read. And Carol?
Yes. So Suzanne Carter was born in Los Angeles on April 7th, 1928, to Charles and Dorothy Myers. She passed away on April 8th, 2020, at the age of 92. Sue contracted polio at the age of 2 and lived with it through her entire life. She graduated from Manual Arts High School in 1945. In June of 1948, she married Donald M. Carter and moved to El Segundo, and there they built their first house on Eucalyptus Street. They later moved to Bungalow Drive and raised 4 children. After her children were raised, Sue went to the University of Dominguez Hills and received her degree in American Studies. Sue had a love of reading books and became president of the Friends of the El Segundo Library for 20 years. During that time, she raised many dollars for the library and started more programs. She was also the president of the El Segundo History Community for many years. Sue, the El Segundo Citizen of the Year in 1992, and received many accolades for her work and volunteer efforts. Sue is survived by her children, Bruce and Kimberly Carter, Tim Carter, Keith and Patty Carter, and Donna Sue Heslip, and her grandchildren, Matt and Leanne Carter, Christy and Bobby Milk, Nick Carter, Andrew and Marina Carter, Spencer and Sylvia Carter, Ryan and Rachel Carter, Shannon and Joey Carter Nast, Zachary and Sarah Carter. She also survived by 14 grandchildren. Sue was predeceased by her husband Donald M. Carter in 2004. Her parents and brother David Myers, sister Catherine, Dub, and son-in-law Michael Hesblett. A celebration of life will be held later this year due to COVID-19. We will miss you, Sue Carter.
Thank you, Councilmember Kirchtuck. That was very nice. All right, we are adjourned. Have a great evening.